So ever since the announcement of Star Wars Outlaws over a year ago now, there has been plenty of concerns from the community directed at this game, as well as at the developers. And today I wanted to talk about what some of those key concerns are and why they may or may not be a problem as we get closer and closer to the launch of this no doubt polarizing, divisive Star Wars game launching in less than 2 weeks. Now, one of the biggest complaints or concerns that I've seen so far in the lead up to this game is essentially all to do with Kay Vess, the main character of the game, as people are kind of just unsure about how interesting she is as a character. Now, what I will say before I get into my thoughts on this is that I won't really judge until I actually finish the story, because I think it's impossible to tell what a character is going to be like just based on essentially a few lines in a few trailers and stuff like that. So I am kind of reserving my judgment until I have spent enough time with the game to actually form an opinion. That being said, from what we have seen so far, kind of just contradicting what I literally just said about not forming any judgment, she does seem just a little bit bland. And to me, she does almost seem a little bit like Han Solo from Wish, which is something that I don't think any of us want to see. Someone that's kind of similar to someone we've already experienced in a character like Han Solo, but just kind of a worse version of that. Now, I will say too that I think I said the same thing about Cal Kestis in the lead up to Jedi Fallen Order, because he didn't seem all that interesting to me leading into that game. And even hell, halfway through Jedi Fallen Order, I didn't really care for Cal Kestis all that much. Yet now that I've finished Fallen Order, obviously back when it launched, and especially after Jedi Survivor, Cal Kestis is now probably in my top 10 or so favorite characters in Star Wars, even though I was kind of saying the same thing about him that I was saying just earlier about Kay Vess, where she seems a little bit bland, she doesn't seem that exciting, and I'm not super interested in trying to learn more about this character. So like I said, I'm going to kind of reserve judgment there, because I will most likely eat my words, considering I said pretty much the exact same thing about Cal Kestis. Now, one of the other biggest concerns that I have seen, and this is kind of just with literally every Ubisoft game that comes out, especially when they're open world, is just the fact that this is being made or published anyway by Ubisoft. Ubisoft obviously have a bad reputation among the gaming community at times. It's much the same as Activision and EA. All of these really big companies, they do kind of garner these negative reputations. And to be honest, that alone, whether it's actually based in any reality or whether people are just making things up, that alone scares people off. If people see Ubisoft as a bad company, whether they are or aren't, that literally doesn't matter to those people, because if they see them as a bad company, they are going to be scared that this game is going to suck or it's going to be overpriced or stuff like that. And that is obviously not a good starting point for anyone to be excited about an upcoming game. Now, one thing that I'll say about Ubisoft open world games, at least in the last probably 10 or so years, I think some of the early games like the original Assassin's Creed trilogy, for example, for me personally, they are some of the most groundbreaking video games that I had ever played at that point. And I still rate Assassin's Creed 2 and essentially that whole trilogy as some of the best games I've ever played. So I don't think all Ubisoft games are like that, but I do think in the last decade or so, they've had a bit of a reputation of having very like checklisty open world games where there's no like proper push and pull that you experience in the best open world games out there. It has actually become a little bit of a meme that there is a difference between like a good open world game and a Ubisoft open world game. Not to say that Ubisoft games are bad, they're just very Ubisofty, and that's something that a lot of people are also turned off by. What I mean by that is that in a lot of their games, like I said, they're very checklisty. Instead of being super engaging, they will often have stuff that's just like, go and kill these 3 enemies and then go and speak to this character and then go and look for a certain item in this area. And once you're done, come back to me and we'll get to the next mission. And it kind of just feels like you're doing a to-do list where it just gives you a bunch of things to do. It'll give you the exact location, so you don't have to like find it. You don't have to search for these things. It literally just says, go exactly to this location, do this exact thing, and then just come back to me after that. And realistically, that's not the most engaging way to make any video game, let alone open world games, which are meant to be fun for us to explore. And that's kind of the point of an open world game. So that's something that a lot of people are concerned about. I'm a little bit concerned about that myself. It was a little bit like that in Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, which is made by Massive Entertainment as well. Not to say that that game was bad. I actually really rate that game, but it did feel very checklisty at times. And I really hope that that is not the case when it comes to Star Wars Outlaws. Now, something else that I've seen a lot of people concerned about is essentially to do with two separate things, both kind of being in line with the same thing, and that is to do with the pricing of the game, but also to do with the season pass. It does initially sound bad, in my opinion, having a season pass in a single player game. It's just one of those buzzwords that kind of sounds scary, because that's something that we've seen a lot when it comes to multiplayer games, and it does feel as though they're kind of like milking money out of people. So I do understand why people are kind of scared off by that initially. Now, I actually don't have that much of an issue with it myself personally, because they're releasing DLC packs and it's pretty normal to pay for DLC packs. So I don't actually have an issue with it, but I do understand that people are kind of scared off by simply the words season pass. And again, that's one of those things, almost like I said about Ubisoft in general, it is one of those things that just scares people off at the first time hearing it. A lot of people are kind of including the season pass into the overall price. So they're kind of saying, well, the game costs $70, but then the season pass is going to cost an extra $30. So this is a $100 game, and that's a lot of money. And if you look at it that way, I do understand that, but I also don't know if people understand it is optional. You don't have to get the DLC packs. And what I would recommend is just don't get the season pass yet. Play the game, see if you like the game first, or even hell, don't pre-order the game, just literally wait and see what people say in reviews and stuff like that. If it looks good, then go buy the game itself and play that. And then if you do enjoy the game, then I think that the season pass or just the DLC packs in general are worth it, because if you enjoy the game, you're going to get more of the game. And I think it's fine to pay a little bit of extra money to get, you know, some pretty decent expansions through that game. So that's the way that I would approach that. Realistically, the game should only cost you $70. And if you don't like it, then obviously that still sucks that you've spent money on something you don't really enjoy, but at least doing it that way, you're kind of avoiding spending $100 instead of just spending that $70. Now, one of the final concerns that I've heard, and this is definitely a more recent concern, is to do with those DLC packs that I just mentioned, and even to do with some pre-order bonuses. There's been a lot of articles out there. This isn't even just coming from people who are misinformed. This is from like Games Radar and a lot of like big companies out there that are putting these articles out, saying that you essentially have to pay more or pre-order the game to get Jabba the Hutt or Lando or Hondo and Naka. And if you don't do that, then you're not going to get to experience those characters in the game. Now, that is simply just a misconception. So I'm going to let you guys know right now, that is simply not true. If you don't pre-order the game, you will still be seeing Jabba the Hutt in the game. And that's something that there's been a lot of concern about that, pretty much because of those clickbait titles by those journalists who are either A, straight up clickbaiting to get more views, or B, they are just misinformed themselves and they haven't done the research that they probably should have done before writing that article. When it comes to Jabba the Hutt, there is essentially just a optional mission that is going to be included in the pre-order bonus for the game. If you don't pre-order, you won't get that single mission yet. Jabba is in the base game and he is going to be a massive player in this game. You can pretty much get a really good reputation with the Hutt Cartel and you're going to be seeing a lot of Jabba, whether you pre-order the game or not. So one single mission, in my opinion, isn't an issue. I don't know why people have complained about that, and the way that people are talking about it, it's making it kind of sound like if you don't pre-order the game, you won't get Jabba the Hutt, which is, like I said, literally just a misconception that has been put out there by a lot of journalists. Now, the same thing can be said for Lando, because he is also in the base game. There is a DLC pack that is going to involve a lot more Lando, but Lando is in the base game. He is a character that we can just go and interact with. We can actually learn skills of him from what I know. And so again, you don't have to buy a DLC to get Lando, and if you don't buy the DLC, you won't ever see him. That is, again, not the case at all. The DLC just involves more Lando, and personally, I don't have an issue with that. I think that's kind of the case with literally any DLC. There's a lot of games out there that have DLC where it's like a bit more of this character's story or a bit more of this part of the map or whatever. That doesn't mean you're not getting those characters in the base game. It just means you're getting a little bit more of that story if you do end up getting that DLC. So again, I don't really have an issue with that one, but that is a big concern that I've seen, that people are kind of worried if you don't buy that DLC, you're just not going to get to see Lando in the game. And again, that is just simply not true. Now, the last one though is to do with Hondo or Naka, because there is also another DLC pack coming out that is going to involve Hondo. The thing with this one is that I don't know if Hondo is going to be in the base game, and therefore I may actually have a bit of an issue with this if we do have to buy the DLC to experience Hondo. And if we miss that DLC, then we're not going to get to see him at all in the game. Now, that's not confirmed just yet. We haven't seen whether he is or isn't in that base game. And I will also say this one isn't as big of an issue as if it was Jabba or Lando. I think if you actually lock out Jabba the Hutt or Lando to strictly a DLC, then that is like a genuine issue in my opinion. But I will say about Hondo that this one is a little bit more reasonable in my opinion, because he is kind of the perfect character to have as that little like side story, where if he isn't in the game but then he is in the DLC, that's somewhat understandable. So I'm kind of torn on this one. I think it's not going to be that nice if he's just literally not in the game at all unless you pay extra for the DLC. I think he should hopefully show up in the base game, even if it's just for a little bit, and then there is a full DLC that involves more of his story, similar to what I said about Lando. But again, I'm not too sure if that's the case, and if it isn't the case and he's just not in the base game, he's only in the DLC, then I think I am a little bit torn about that, and I do actually kind of have a bit of an issue. So we're gonna have to wait and see how that one pans out. I think it also does come down to how good not only the base game is, but also the DLC packs. If we have to pay $30 for a season pass to get more Lando and more Hondo, and then the DLC sucks, that's something I think a lot of people, myself included, are gonna have an issue with. But hell, if we get those DLCs and this Hondo DLC is just like one of the coolest DLCs we've ever gotten for a Star Wars game, then I don't think it matters personally, because if the content is good and it's worth the price of admission, I guess, then I actually don't have an issue with that at all. But those are some of the biggest concerns that I've seen so far when it comes to Star Wars Outlaws. I'm keen to hear all of your concerns as well though, so be sure to leave them down in the comments section. Thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and may the Force be with you always.